meeting of the Executive. I think, as members will all be aware, Councillor Goldie has stood down as the convener of the Executive, and pending the appointment of a convener at the March meeting of Council, it's therefore necessary for the meeting to appoint a convener for the purpose of today's meeting. Accordingly, I asked for nominations to convene the meeting this morning. Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, happy to nominate my group leader and council leader, Councillor Cecil Meikle-John.
Happy to second.
Any other nominations? Okay, in the absence of any other nominations, I invite Councillor Meikle-John to take the chair.
Good morning, everyone. Do we have any apologies this morning?
Apologies from Councillor Nimmo and Councillor Goldie.
Thank you. Okay, declarations of interest, financial and non-financial interest within any item on the agenda.
Convener, could I refer to agenda item number 9, the TIF initiative for the Falkirk Gateway, as this could be seen as perhaps impinging on the Grangemouth and Falkirk town centres, and as you know, my wife has a shop in Grangemouth town centre. I'll declare an interest at that stage and leave the room.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Nicholl. Okay, at any other time, if it occurs to them that they do have a financial or non-financial interest, they can declare that as the item comes forward. Okay. Obviously, we're very pleased to see Jim Flynn back with us, and we wish him very well, and I hope that you're on the recovery. Thank you. Okay, minute of the previous meeting. No writers. Happy to agree. Action log. Anything within that anybody would wish to?
On item 432, community empowerment update, it does seem to be a bit behind schedule, so I wonder if there's any update on that at all.
Okay. Do I have anybody that's able to provide? Mr. Ritchie?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I think we mentioned this at the last meet of the Executive, so we appointed an officer to take this forward, but the officer was with us only for a short period, so I had to go through another recruitment process, so the preparation of the background work and the report is delayed, but we'll be hoping to bring a report to members in due course. Okay. Okay, are we content with that, or would you like to give some kind of time scale?
No, that's fine, Convener. Thank you.
That? Okay, thank you. Okay.
Convener, I'm not just sure that we should just accept in due course. Could we perhaps ask Stuart just what due course means to him? Are we talking about the next meeting, or are we talking about the summer, the autumn, the winter? Some idea. Not tying you down to a specific meeting, but some sort of idea of a time frame.
Yes, I think we're probably looking at where are we? Middle of February, so maybe sometime towards the end of March, April.
Okay,
that seems reasonable. Okay, thank you. Nothing else on the action log. I'm going to seek committee's indulgence to bring forward the item on roads in order to have the presentation and let our roads officers go on with the rest of their day job, so to speak, if people are content with that. Yep. Okay. The item on roads, and I'll just ask Gary to come forward, and he's going to give us a presentation.
afternoon, everybody. I think I know everyone in the room, but for those who don't, my name is Gary Neal. I'm the Area Roads Engineer for Falkirk Council. It's my responsibility to look after our 982 kilometres of road network and over 1,000 kilometres of footway network. And I wrote the committee paper for approval today. So why the need for the committee paper? Well, this document here, the Code of Practice, is basically our Bible to how we undertake a lot of roads functions. And this has changed when adoption of it, which was the 28th of October 2018. A lot of councils are in the position that I'm in today, and that they're going through committee to get approval for the adoption of this. The main change is that it recommends a risk-based approach to all aspects of road maintenance. And essentially this removes prescriptive standards, set response times, and includes a risk-based approach to setting levels of service, inspections, responses, resilience, priorities and programmes. So this will help us ensure a robust defence. You all probably know that court decision-making process hierarchy is such that legislation takes number one spot. So the Roads Scotland Act requires us to maintain a list of public roads at the public expense. Then common law duty of care applies to roads authorities. And common law Caparo test is such that harm was reasonably foreseeable, was there a relationship of proximity, and is it fair, just and reasonable to impose a duty of care on the authority. Number 2 in this list is the legal precedent in court cases, and I've highlighted one at the bottom there, which is a Littler versus Liverpool Corporation in 1968. Mr. Justice Cumming Bruce made a judgment to say that a highway is not to be criticised by the standards of a bowling green, and this has been used in numerous defences for local authorities across the country. Where my committee paper fits into this hierarchy is that obviously the Code of Practice has changed, which reflects what our council policies will be, and then records of inspection, customer inquiries, maintenance and works orders will then form whatever defence would be going forward. So what is a road asset safety inspection? Well, it's not just potholes, although we do get a lot of potholes, complaints. Road safety inspections are designed to identify defects to minimise the risk for the travelling public and danger or serious inconvenience to users on the road network. These defects include those that require immediate attention or ones that can be programmed. And this just illustrates a number of things that we would expect inspectors to pick up on a safety inspection. The new Code of Practice, as I said, looks at a risk-based approach, and in doing so it forms a risk matrix. So inspectors are directed to look at what is the likelihood of an incident happening and what is the impact as a result of the incident happening. So questions for the inspector would be what is the likelihood, and then it would form somewhere on this matrix to see what the priority of response would be. Priority 1 being immediate action within 24 hours, priority 2 within 5 days, priority 3 within 25 days, priority 4 programmed work, and no response. So in determining the likelihood of an incident, this is the guidance based on the Code of Practice. Almost certain, imminently will happen, over 90% likelihood, could happen daily, and it's imminent, and then it works its way down to remote, which could be force majeure or unforeseeable risk. Similarly, when looking at the consequence, it's not only the impact on people, it's the impact on what our service objectives are, the financial impact, it's the impact on people, and the reputational impact. Have there ever been any instances for this similar scenario? And I guess the key point to stress in this methodology is what is the most probable consequence here, not what is possible. And that's the main mindset shift in this Code of Practice. So I've prepared some examples to give you real life examples of how this differs from the old Code of Practice. Those from Stenishville might recognise this street. This is Johnston Avenue in Stenhousemuir. So whilst this footway may look cracked, uneven, unsightly, under our current Code of Practice, this does not want any reactive maintenance. There is no footway trip there or defect which would result in us putting forward a works instruction. We may well put forward for planned maintenance, but there is no defect that exists here. Under the new code of practice and the risk-based approach, doing a dynamic risk assessment, we know that Alzheimer's Scotland lease that adjacent building. So we know the demographic of the service users which are traversing that street. We know that these ironwork here may possibly cause them an issue, and therefore we would therefore take forward this for repair. Because under the old code of practice, it wouldn't necessarily meet that threshold.
Gary, just 2 seconds. Would it be possible for you to go close to the microphone? I think some up the back can't hear you well.
A better? Yeah. So in contrast, this is Neil Road in Camelin. This may look like a nice new road, defect free. However, in actual fact, there's a pond and water problem here in any rain circumstance. So we know when this pond and water will obviously freeze in cold weather, presenting a risk to road users. We know that the footfall here is high, and therefore it would rank highly in this new risk matrix approach. And the consequence of such an incident would be quite significant, relatively speaking. Again, this is skin flats. So you see on the left-hand side here, there's a combined cycleway and footway. So under the new code of practice, again, we know that if a defect occurred in the channel of the carriageway here, it would have less of an impact than one would happen in the wheel track of a vehicle, because cyclists should be using the cycleway on the left-hand side. So a defect in the carriageway would only necessarily, the likelihood would be that a vehicle would hit it. So if there's a defect in the channel, it might have a less investigated level than one that happened in the wheel track for a vehicle. Whereas the old code of practice, any defect in the carriageway at the same magnitude would carry the same response time. So the outcomes of my committee report and the new risk-based approach is that each defect is analysed with regard to the context in which it actually exists, and that's a key takeaway from the new code of practice. Going back to the skin flats example there, whereas before each defect would carry the same response time, but in actual fact you have to take in the dynamic of the actual situation. It's hoped that it will minimise the exposure to danger or serious inconvenience to users of the network and the wider community. So that takes us back to the Alzheimer's Scotland example in Stenhousemuir. It mitigates the council's exposure to risk and enables us to have a robust defence of claims of loss, which I can advise that it's already particularly high. Carriageway claims will paid out £2,696 for the year 17-18. And in doing so, moving into this, it will ensure that we keep that repudiation rate high. It ensures we comply with statutory requirements. Increased best value is hoped that will reduce the number of defects incorrectly allocated and increase the number of first-time permanent repairs and then move to planned maintenance rather than reactive. And finally, in not adopting this as a risk of creating a scenario of isolation for Falkirk and not complying with national guidance. And that is the key takeaway from my report and this presentation. So there's an unintended efficiency here, and that inspectors can programme their works better. It hopefully will lead us to more planned maintenance rather than reactive maintenance, hoping to get under 30% reactive maintenance. And there shouldn't be that much difference to the end user. It's just about how we change. It's the methodology that's changing, not the repairs themselves. So happy to take any questions anyone has.
I think if you want to take a seat just now,
Yep.
I'll ask the Director to speak to the report, and then we'll open up for questions. Rona?
Yes, thank you. I don't have a great deal to add to the presentation. Obviously, the focus of the code of practice has changed. We've moved from an approach where we take a uniform approach to the various repairs to one that's based on a risk assessment. And members will recognise the risk matrix that was on Gary's presentation there as being one that we use, that's very familiar and we use regularly in all of our other risk work within the Council. think the other point I want to make is just to reinforce the one that Gary made in relation to the Council's ability to demonstrate that it is meeting its statutory obligations by conforming to this new code of practice and this new approach. So I think that's all I would really want to add. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Convener. Firstly, I'd like to thank Rona and especially Dot and Gary for putting this report together. I know they've had a lot of work and they've kept me informed throughout, which has been handy. I have a couple of questions after this little bit, but just to talk about the presentation, I think that was a really good idea. I think it gave members the opportunity to listen rather than read through a long report and pull out bits of that. I think it was obviously good for the informed members, but indeed I think it saved officers, busy officers' time, rather than being a full presentation as well. I think that was a good idea. As Gary's highlighted, one of the main changes is the implementation of road asset safety inspection. And I think if people don't have a lot of time, the risk matrix in the report illustrates what this is and what the small changes are. I was quite surprised this wasn't how it was done previously. Anyway, I think this is the obvious way to go. So on the back of that, I just have a couple of questions, which would probably Gary would be best to answer. If you want to come back up to the table, Gary, I think that'd be the best idea, Convener.
I hadn't intended to actually go away.
Oh, right. Don't get to run away yet.
It was a good try.
Thank you, Gary. Given that this seems to be such a change in methodology, how prepared are Falkirk Council officers for this proposed implementation?
Falkirk Council inspectors have all been trained by the Institute of Highway Engineers and this changing mindset. They did it through instilling amongst with a number of neighbouring authorities. So they went through numerous scenarios. What's the legal implications of this? How prepared are you? And what they went through was a number of examples of here's a defect here, here's the context, what would the outcome be? And the reason for doing that is to ensure consistency of decision. Therefore, one person is not being, because it is subjective in a way, but it's ensuring that the outcome is that there's consistency across each inspector who's responsible for a set area. So they've all been on training courses, they're all on the Institute of Highway Engineers Highway Inspector Register. So if it ever does get called into court, that's a proven record of their competence as well as the numerous years' experience in doing the job.
Very good, excellent. And my final question is, it seems that the inspection of every defect will be subjective. Are there any additional pressures for you guys other than training with this?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on it in that presentation, in that the record keeping aspect of what we do is going to be key moving forward. Because whereas it was black and white and prescriptive before, a defect was a defect if it met a set criteria. Now it's a dynamic risk-based approach. Record keeping and decisions made on each defect will inform whether a court will either take a view on something. So inspection records and photographs, decisions, any logs, any customer complaints all need to be held centrally in order for us to provide the robust defence.
Right. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This council is very lucky to have the services of both Gary and Dot. They're two great officers, and I'm very glad that they're choosing their careers with Falkirk. But both of them know that I'm not a great fan of anything that introduces a degree of rigidity into anything, and flexibility and common sense sometimes goes out the window. So I'm particularly glad that Gary has said there that this system has the capacity to be even more flexible than what has previously been the case. However, Gary spoke about the Alzheimer's home in, I think it was in Stenhousemuir. And as he well knows, and as every member sitting around this table knows, one of the first things that when people's on to complain about footpaths or something within a street, the complainant always says, and there's an awful lot of old people stay in this street. So I'm just seeking assurance that that flexibility and introduction of looking at the wider picture, as well as quite obviously being very appropriate in the case in Johnson Avenue, will also be applied elsewhere. And in saying that, I appreciate that every street virtually has a lot of elderly people in, so I'm just wondering how they're going to balance this out. Because next week or the week after, when I come on and complain about potholes or footpaths in a bad state of repair, and there's a lot of elderly people stay in that street, Gary, what's his response going to be?
Gary, over to you.
Yeah, so what we currently do and going forward will do is look at areas such as sheltered housing complexes where we know outside Scotland or other services like that lease any buildings. We will look at that and use that in our decision making process. You're right, there is a lot of elderly people stay in every street now given the demographic of the country, but we'll use that to inform any decision on the ground, and any decision on the ground will be subjective and take into context where they are and what service users use that road. I hope that gives you some degree of comfort. We can't just make a... We can take into cognizance the fact that old people are there, but we can't use that as a weighting factor in every circumstance in order to heighten the response time of a repair.
I can just see some potential conflict, convener. Members have to prove how many elderly people stay in a street or whatever.
I think it may well have to be tried and tested to see how effective it is. And I think having moved to the risk-based approach, and we do have that flexibility, I think that's a positive thing. But we'll need to wait and see how that actually, in practice, actually comes to fruition.
Convener, it was just a thought crossed my mind, although Malcolm is concerned about elderly people. It's elderly. The word elderly can be problematic. It's really the definition of elderly, what is meant by elderly in terms of age.
Age is all relative. Okay. David.
Convener, yeah, it certainly is relative. Anyone who's served on an audit committee knows the time and effort that's been into risk assessment. It's the way that all public audit agencies are going, for obvious reasons. That there's an element of crystal ball gazing, if you like, for risk assessments, which I think do give us the opportunity for that flexibility that Councillor Nicholl has mentioned. Equally, I think it does also give us a clear guidance in relation to the roles of the staff and what they have to do in order to assess potential risk. Because the fact that it remains that the roads section is probably the one section of any department within the council that relies more on forward seeing and immediate assessment than any other. I don't envy them in that aspect of it, and I know that we've probably all come into conflict with the road section over rulings with regards to potholes, claims by constituents and the like. So I think anything that clarifies the position and formalises it in a way that people can understand has to be welcome. I do share Malcolm's views on flexibility, but I do think that risk-based outcome gives us that benefit for that flexibility that perhaps wasn't in the existing system.
Thank you. Joan?
Thanks, Convener. I'll join the Gary and Doc fan club as well. Might as well. But I just wanted to...
Oh no, I've got for 5.
I'm going to lower the tone a wee bit and talk about money, though. 5.1, the financial implications, and obviously it does say that this is going to be improve efficiency and provide greater value for money, and that would be marvellous and wonderful, but obviously we're all aware that we do have a budget next week, and I just wondered, roads maintenance is one of the options that's up for cut, and if that cut was to take place, how much of an impact would that have on these works? Because as we know, I think it was David or somebody's mentioned, we all get complaints. We always, every member will be contacting you about paths and roads. And I just think that obviously money plays a key part of that. How much of an impact would it have? Oh, I'm getting the heavy team.
Thank you very much. I think I'll pick that up. As Gary has mentioned, this is a far more efficient way to manage the roads maintenance and repair system. And as he also mentioned in his presentation, that will mean that there's more planned maintenance rather than reactive. And as Gary knows best of all, the reactive maintenance sometimes means that you have to do it twice. So there will be efficiencies come out of this for good reason. And these efficiencies, it's intended, subject to this report being approved today, will contribute to that £200,000 saving that's been identified in the budget. And also, you'll recall, there's a report to come back to members in relation to winter maintenance as well. So there are efficiencies in there that could also potentially contribute. These are obviously subject to member agreement, though. So that's how this proposal will contribute. It's not £200,000 worth of savings, but it would contribute towards it.
Looking probably for some sort of confidence that in the changeover from the system that we're using at the moment, if you're saying that, so you're looking to go towards a more permanent solution, and I agree that we have in the past wasted a lot of money putting sticking plasters on what should have been a complete, new bone put in there. But I'm wary that in that crossover between the system that we're using at the moment and this new approach, that there will be a lot of temporary repairs not done, and people will see the impact of that.
Can I just ask one unrelated question? A lot of the repairs to footpaths and roads are caused by the utility companies. When they mess up our roads, what sanction do we have to get them back, and what time scale? Because this is very topical just now in my area.
It is, and it's also quite a challenge for colleagues. This is all governed by the New Roads and Streetworks Act, these works. So there are powers within that legislation to require utilities to restore as they were before. But I think there are some challenges associated with that, which maybe Gary can provide more detail on that.
So, statutory undertakers such as Scottish Water, Scottish Gas, etc., they have the power to undertake works, augment their works, as they're public in nature. So we can't stop them, basically, is my first point. We can't stop them undertaking works on their apparatus within our public road. However, our duty is to coordinate those road works as much as practicable in order to minimise disruption to the road network, ensure that the repair undertaken by these statutory undertakers is correct, and there is thereafter a maintenance period whereby we will sample, inspect it, and if there's any defective repairs, we will then instruct them to repair it. And there's a 2-year guarantee period on that.
I think that's an important message that Gary has just said there, to get out that these utility companies, they're not a law unto themselves, but they have the absolute right to come and dig up our roads and pavements. And as Gary well knows, certainly in Lower Braes just now, it's given me real issues regarding the amount of works that's going on, and people just find it very difficult to understand. It's easy to blame the council, and those guys get a lot of stick for it, but it's really not the council's fault, and people really can't understand that when people they want broadband, they want water, and that can't happen unless these essential maintenance works are carried out, and we have very little control over that.
Absolutely. Gary?
Again, I appreciate the officers already mentioned. Can I also say thank you to Rona, because she's also very helpful when it comes to roads matters. On this, I look at what's happening here is that the dynamic risk approval system is moving towards what I would see as normal risk assessments of projects, where you don't actually just risk assess the action of the repair. You've got to think about third parties and all possible impacts on that. And that has got to be welcomed, because the difference that modern risk assessments have made in other industries have meant an awful lot less people dying. And this is what I can see here, and I take it I'm reading this right, that's exactly what you're doing. You're moving to come into line with the rest of really the health and safety side of the world.
Absolutely, and it's recognised in the code of practice. You know, this every council will be moving towards this. It's all going through committee, as I say. One council has it full implemented already, which is West Lothian, and the rest of the councils are all at varying degrees of implementation. Most of them are where I am today, and it's recognised that moving to this risk-based approach is the way forward for this industry. The efficiencies that will be a result of that is that there is no black and white in every scenario. Every defect is looked at in its own consequence, its own demographic. You know, what's the traffic type? Was it a lot of HGVs? Is there a lot of cyclists and whatnot, etc., etc.? And that is all fed into this risk assessment process. So it's envisaged that the efficiency will be that the right decisions will be made first time and result in more planned maintenance. You know, if we look at, we've got a hotspot of defects that have been reported, we can plan that for bigger repairs rather than just filling a pothole. We can look at it holistically, look at a bigger project and removing defects from the network.
Okay, colleagues, are we happy to approve the report? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Thank you to Gary, to Dot. If you wish, you can go. Rona, I think you're going to have to stay though. Items as on the paper, and item 5 is towards a fairer Falkirk, and this is going to be presented by our Chief Executive, Kenneth.
Thank you very much, Convener. The purpose of this report is to seek approval of the refreshed poverty strategy towards a fairer Falkirk 2019 to 2024, and also to address the Executive's decision on the 15th of January of this year in response to the motion on universal credit. Falkirk Council approved its first poverty strategy in March 2011. That strategy included a number of commitments to address poverty, and since it was approved, there have been some notable successes, I think, in terms of moving that agenda forward. A number of these are listed at section 3.2 of the report, and they include the development of the new advice and support hubs with community outreach, the programme to provide food and activities to children and families in need during school holidays, and in fact, Appendix 1, there's some detail of the summer food initiative last year, which I think shows a real commitment to addressing considerable need. We've also been supporting people claiming universal credit through the provision of personal budgeting support, digital support, and the Scottish Welfare Fund crisis grants. In addition to that, we've implemented the online entitlement calculator, which allows the public and frontline staff to easily undertake income maximisation checks, and we've developed new charges and concessions policy that includes free concessions for people in receipt of means-tested income-related state benefits. The first poverty strategy was developed in the expectation that there would be significant changes to the social security system that were likely to increase poverty. And over time, we've worked to understand the full impact of this and reflect that learning in the new strategy. And whilst I think we would want to say that there has been considerable progress made, I think the new strategy also acknowledges and recognises that there is a lot more that we need to do. So turning towards the refreshed strategy, in 2017 we established a Fairer Falkirk partnership to oversee our work around poverty, and the members of that partnership are set out at paragraph 4.2. This group has helped to guide the new strategy, which is set out in Appendix 2 to the report, and which I think sets out very starkly the kind of challenges and issues facing our citizens that are in poverty. The refreshed strategy focuses on mitigating the impact of poverty on individuals, families and communities, and is based around the 4 themes set out at paragraph 4.5. Fairer access to services, fairer money, fairer culture and fairer childhood. The second element of this report relates to the motion considered by the Executive on the 15th of January as set out at paragraph 5.1. In addressing the motion, it's important to recognise the work that has taken place following approval of the previous strategy, and that the new strategy has been developed in anticipation of the impact of the changes to the social security system. And we identified that we needed to make sure our services focused on providing to those most in need with the support they need at and when they needed it. This included undertaking a review that led us to redesign our frontline services to ensure they're focused on supporting those who need our help the most, and that is, as I mentioned previously, the advice and support hubs and the outreach service that goes with that. This service is targeted at addressing inequalities by specifically supporting people in or at risk of poverty. And maximising people's income is a particular focus for our advice hubs, but also in terms of working alongside the Citizens Advice Bureau and using the entitlement calculator. In terms of sustaining tenancies, we understand how living on a low income makes it hard for people to maintain their tenancies. In particular, setting up a new home on a low income can be a particular challenge. And a variety of support is available to help people establish and maintain tenancies, including housing support, the Scottish Welfare Fund community care grants, social work support and third sector support. To improve the sustainment of tenancies, we have developed a project plan through the Council of the Future, which will focus on how we improve tenancy sustainment. The recent housing services restructure will provide more frontline staff to focus on early intervention, including scheduling more frequent visits to pick up on relevant issues. We also recently submitted our Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan to Scottish Government, which will focus on the prevention of homelessness. And this will include working with our partners to ensure that vulnerable clients who are most at risk of losing their tenancies are provided with tailored support that meets their needs for as long as they want it. Turning to the action plan, which is Annex 3 to the strategy, this will be reviewed annually by the Fairer Falkirk Partnership to ensure that progress is being made. And progress will also be reported to members and to the community planning partners on an annual basis. Whilst this is a partnership strategy, it is proposed that the Council makes 5 specific commitments in support of this strategy, and this underpins a priority within the corporate plan to address poverty, and these are set out at paragraph 6.3 of the report. The first of these is that we make it everyone's job to do their bit to mitigate the impact of poverty across the Falkirk Council area. And here we recognise the role of all staff, and particularly those in the front line, to support those in need. We intend to make the food and activities available to families, that programme, during the school holidays, an ongoing commitment, and members will note that there is a specific recommendation to support this work going forward, with details set out in section 7 of the report. The other 3 commitments are to work with lone parents to understand their needs and what we can do to address these, to help people maximise their income by supporting them to claim all the benefits they are entitled to, and to work together with partners to help people make their house a home, and this could include the provision of furniture and other basic essentials which will help individuals support their tenancies. In conclusion, this report provides an updated poverty strategy and an action plan to deliver on this strategy. It sets out a clear direction for the Council and partners in seeking to support those in poverty when they need that support most. In revising the strategy and the actions underpinning that, we have sought to address the issues raised in the motion agreed by the Executive at its last meeting. And to achieve our corporate plan outcome of reducing the impact of poverty on children and their families, we recognise this requires commitment from all services of the Council, and we need to make sure that it is part of everyone's job to do their bit to mitigate the impact of poverty. And providing all our staff with a basic understanding of life in poverty will help ensure that we treat all our citizens respectfully, without judgment, and therefore reducing stigma for those who live in poverty. The 5 proposed commitments at section 6.3 support that all-council approach. So today there are 3 recommendations in front of you set out at paragraph 2, to approve the strategy towards a fairer Falkirk 2019-2024, to agree the 5 commitments as set out at paragraph 6.3, and to recommend to Council that 40,000 is allocated at the budget setting to continue the Holiday Food Initiative to 2019-20. I'm happy to take any questions. My colleagues Sally Buchanan and Fiona Campbell are also in the chamber to help deal with any questions of detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. I think this is one of our key council strategies, but I would just want to give members assurance that it doesn't sit alone. It is very much interlinked with many other strategies of the council, and particularly around our economic growth and employability, because there obviously is a clear link to trying to lift people out of poverty and getting them to become more economically active. The key areas that were being asked to look at, the 5 key commitment areas, are evidence-based. That's from information that we know where people are more struggling, and that is around sustaining tenancies, lone parents in particular. If anyone has been in that circumstance, you have all the same expenses, no matter whether you're on your own or as a couple, and if you have children, then that can be significantly harder to be able to make ends meet. Therefore, that's one of the key reasons for having that particular piece of work. We know that the summer food and activity programme has been very well received, and from the feedback from our schools, etc., that has been very positive, and that children have come back to school in a much better position to start their learning. But the fact that we've taken the whole family approach to that particular programme has given benefits not just to the children but to the whole family, and we know that where a child perhaps sees the parents going without, that has a psychological effect on them as well. So that's proved to be very, very positive, and I would hope that members would support in going forward to the budget that we would continue that particular programme. It's a small pot of money, but has significant impacts, and you will see from the report what the previous funding has achieved. It also gives us an opportunity to look at external sources of funding to bring that forward. Sustaining tenancies, particularly around universal credit, is going to become a growing area, and we have to look at doing early intervention and support in order to be able to prevent those tenancies breaking down, and also financial risk to the council and on all of that. And if you can make a house into a home, then people are more likely to be able to be sustained. I think it's a good comprehensive strategy. I think it's very achievable, and I think that's something that we have to be mindful of. I think we all have a part to play in trying to mitigate poverty. We don't have all the economic and legislative levers to eradicate poverty, but we do have the ability to mitigate it wherever we can. So I would commend the report to you, and I would move the recommendations as in section 2. Okay. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Convener, and I'm more than happy to support the vast majority of what you said there. I think every member around this table recognises not only the need but indeed the duty of elected representatives to do whatever can be done to help those more disadvantaged than ourselves sat around this table. And whether that disadvantage is exacerbated from wherever it comes from, I don't think that should influence members in supporting the initiatives that you have just spoken about now, outlined in this paper. Indeed, I was very keen that this got a full discussion, so I thank you for bringing this forward today. I think there are many good things in the paper that will help reduce poverty and those disadvantaged. Poverty, sadly, has always been with us, and I suspect that there's not going to be a magic wand that is going to cure it any time soon. But as I said at the start, it is our duty to do anything that we can to ensure that it is at least reduced if within our power to do so. So I certainly welcome what has come forward today, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. Malcolm Jones.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, this report is a good report, but the fact that we're here today talking about mitigating the impact of poverty, I think it's a disgrace. I think to be mitigating the impact of decisions made by our governments is something that we should all be ashamed of. I think that children are only children once. And what's happening here, I was reading through this and I wasn't sure whether I was more mad or more sad about what I was reading. In this day and age, I think that, as I said, we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and I think that the people who have this wealth aren't distributing it in a fair way. So we can call it fairer Falkirk, we can call it fairer culture or fairer childhood. But when I read that, I thought it's not just about the educational, and yes, as I say, we are trying to feed children so that they don't go back to school malnourished after the summer holidays. That in itself, it's abhorrent. And I think that it's not just their education, because as we know, education impacts your life chances. We as adults, I know I'm the adult that I am because I was lucky to have parents that loved me and looked after me. We didn't own a car, we didn't have holidays abroad or any of these other things, but I was looked after, I was loved, and I was able to believe in myself, and an awful lot of children don't have that. I think that things like, as they said there, it's not just not going on school trips, but not being able to invite their friends over for tea because their parents are embarrassed about the state of the house. And people living in poverty don't choose to be that way. It is, as I said, life chances, and we're perpetuating that. I think if there's one thing that we need to take away from here today, it's just that we should not be mitigating the impact of poverty. We should be standing up and shouting about this, and we should be saying this isn't right, and we're not going to stand for it any longer. I think to sentence people to a poorer quality of life because of poor political decisions is an absolute shameful fact that we're living with.
I thank you for that, Joan, but as I say, that in this council we don't have the economic levers to make the change. But we also have to look at where those decisions are actually made. David?
Yeah, Convener, I think Joan's made some interesting points. For example, we shouldn't be mitigating. There's been a series of motions over the years from various groups within the council to do that, to mitigate. We don't, as you have rightly said, have the powers, the economic powers, to do anything but try to mitigate poverty. And equally, when we try to assess the success or otherwise of the national government, when I say national government, obviously I mean the Scottish government, then I think that we should give credit where credit's due, because they've sought to mitigate in a way that means that no one pays the bedroom tax. We've almost forgotten about the bedroom tax, but it's still an annual addition to the budget process at Holyrood. We have seen the establishment of the Scottish Welfare Fund. Again, it's not the responsibility of the Scottish Government, but we have seen that introduction, and we know how much that is valued and needed by our constituents. So I think that there has been a fair bit of mitigation going. I'd like to see more powers to the Scottish Parliament, but again, that's a different argument for a different day. The fact remains that while we do accept that there has been a lack of clarity in terms of some of the approaches, particularly from Joan's party actually, some of the votes that have abstained on, for example, rather than voting against some of the more draconian changes that have occurred within the benefit system. then we can perhaps see where we've gone wrong in the past. In terms of the future, in terms of this responsibilities role, we need to ensure, as elected members, that this strategy becomes the #1 strategy for every department of Falkirk Council. It's the first that they make reference to when they make decisions, and it's the first that they consider when there are changes in the offering, or when there are opportunities in the offering. It's not going to be good enough just to adopt a strategy that looks good on the outside, but is untested on the inside. And we'll make sure that is what actually happens, because this is the #1 strategy, in my view, for the future in terms of social management, in terms of the abilities of this authority to properly mitigate. And I don't make any apologies for using that term, mitigation, because it's important that we do mitigate, and this strategy has to be #1. Of course, there are elements in terms of economic developments. For example, in terms of the strategies adopted by an employment training unit, for example, there are many examples of additional strategies that are worthwhile and will sit alongside this strategy very, very nicely indeed. And we'll make sure that they give them due consideration in a manner which is right. But I don't think we can allow a situation to arise where there's not a challenge, and whether that challenge comes from the members, whether they come from the general public, or whether they come from officers, we have that challenge to ensure that the strategy is properly implemented and given its due worth. So I hope that Joan will set aside our natural instincts to attack where I don't think that attack is justified, and to essentially praise where praise is worthwhile, and where praise is actually due. And I do think that in terms of the national programme for mitigation of issues such as the problems that have been created by the universal credit, and again, give some credit to the Conservative members in this authority who came out and said universal credit wasn't implemented in the manner in which they had hoped, and they were very much against it themselves. So I think that what we have is a unity of purpose, and we just need to maybe set aside the natural biases that we have in order to fully implement and fully impact on this particular subject.
Okay, I'm not going to have bank forward.
Just a 19-1 point. I didn't mention any political party, and when I spoke, it was not as a politician, it was as a human being, it was as a mother. And I think that I didn't mention, as I said, any policies. I could have said, we had a budget last week, and Derek Mackay does have the powers to mitigate more. We could have had a raise in child benefit. They could have topped up the universal credits. I didn't say. I said governments, and I said poor political decisions. It's at all levels. And I appreciate that Falkirk, as a local authority, we are doing our best. But my main point was that there shouldn't be this level of poverty in our society. Yes, we should be doing our best, but we shouldn't be in this situation in the first place.
But the fact is, we are in this situation, and we do know that from the Scottish Government there's over £100 million worth of funding being put into the mitigation around the welfare benefits reform. That is fact. That is been well documented, and as we go into the budget round, then that 100 million could have come in another way to local authorities. Okay, Robert.
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to say that this was a Labour initiative that was introduced in 2011, and I'm glad to see that the current administration is building on that. There's been lots of initiatives introduced, but do we have any hard evidence that inequalities have reduced? Is there a report or anything that we could look at to see that inequalities have indeed reduced, and also has an additional 40k recommended being taken into the budget figures?
The final point I can say from the point of view of the administration's budget, that has been taken into account in our budget preparations. I don't know whether Fiona or Sally would be able to give an indication. I think it's a very complex situation about how you could actually measure whether inequalities have been mitigated or reduced in any way because of the changing legislative framework that we're in. It's very dynamic, and I think it might be very difficult to get a clear measure. But I don't know whether Sally or Fiona would be able to make comment on that.
Can everyone hear if I talk from here? I think it is very complex, as Councillor Meikle-John says, in terms of understanding has equalities reduced. We understand from the evidence that we have that actually inequalities are increasing. That isn't a local issue, that's a national issue. Part of the evidence of the strategy and part of the information in the strategy notes that actually people in poverty, there are more people in poverty now than there were a number of years ago, and part of the rationale for developing this strategy was to address that very thing. Locally, poverty is changing, and one of the things that we picked up in the strategy is the need to understand where people are in poverty and how we can help them wherever they are, wherever they live. But usually we have, and previously we've had a focus on areas of deprivation, those areas that are in the worst 15% of areas in Scotland. We know in this area those areas are slightly changing. The numbers in those areas are slightly changing, but poverty is not going down. But that isn't anything that is about Falkirk, that's a national issue. We did quite a lot of work in terms of profiling, looking at statistics, looking at those in need to develop the evidence that then we used to inform the strategy development. So we can provide that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener. I too agree with a lot of what Councillor Coombs said, and it is a difficult read, this report. I especially agree with the fact that Scotland is indeed one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But I don't think it's been seconded to the report yet. I'm happy to second if it hasn't. I maybe missed that. Thank you.
Okay. Are we happy to agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Move on to Development Plan, Revised Supplementary Guidance SG10, Education and New Housing Development. And Mrs Gleisner.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, as the report says, and the members will be familiar with, we have a number of supplementary guidance papers which, once approved, form part of our development plan. And the report today relates to SG10, which relates to new housing development and contributions towards education services. The original SG10 was adopted in July 2015 along with our LDP, which is now called LDP1. But obviously with changes that have occurred between then and now, it requires to be considered again. The document itself relates to, provides for specific rates for contribution for houses and for flats, and the calculation is undertaken by multiplying the typical cost of construction per pupil and what's called PPR, which is pupil product ratios. And the table shown in the report gives more detail in relation to that. It's very important that the guidance remains fit for purpose, otherwise it could be open to challenge by developers, and it needs to be changed because of the changes to the two elements of that. The revised construction costs will also include an element for inflation since 2015, and these have been benchmarked against costs provided to us by the Scottish Futures Trust. As I said, the table at section paragraph 4.2 gives more detail on the changes that are being proposed. As with the current SG10, there will be a clause in the revised version in respect of viability, where a developer argues that the sums sought for this contribution can make the proposed development non-viable, and there is a provision within the guidance for how you can go about tapping into that provision if you want to. The document that's before members today for approval, if approved, would be subject to a 6-week consultation period, and there's obviously already been consultation in terms of the document being compiled, but this would have a formal requirement for it to be consultation period. And in the event that there's no responses to that, I'm seeking authority to go ahead and approve the SG10 at this stage. However, in the event that there are responses of substance come back, then I'll bring a report back to members in due course. So that's the recommendations contained in paragraph 2, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Knightley. David?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. In moving the report and recommendations contained within it, can I just thank Alistair for his work in this particular field. The development plans, of course, are something that akin to painting the Forth Road Bridge. You just get to the end of it and it's time to start again. In actual fact, we're ahead of that particular scenario, and what we have just now and before us today is an important part of the succession of LDP2 from LDP1. So it's something that we must go through, something that I hope that we'll go through unchallenged, or at least undivided on, because the development plan is a crucial element of our policies and procedures and our implementation of the development of our communities. It's something that was described as Planner's Bible. I'm not sure it's got such status myself, but it is an important document, and Rona and our team led by Alistair have done an excellent job in terms of LDP2. It's important that we get LDP2 through as quickly as possible, and so that it becomes the development plan, and the only development plan we have consideration of at this point in time. Simply because it's the message that's sent to developers as to what's available and what's not, and that's an important factor. This part relates more so to education, and it's something that members of the Planning Committee in particular, and members of the Council throughout, have been questioning, and I particularly welcome this report today because it does clarify a number of points in relation to, for example, the contribution that developers would expect to pay towards education. So with that, I formally move the recommendations contained within the report, Convener, on page 72, that the publication of the draft revised supplementary guidance attached in Appendix 1, the basis for public consultation, delegate authority to the Director of Development Services to submit and finalise versions of the guidance to Scottish Ministers for approval if no significant objections are received during the public consultation. And finally, to receive a further report on the guidance if significant objections are raised during the public consultation. We hope obviously there will be no significant objections, but we have to include that as part of the recommendations. So with that, Convener and Bradley move.
Convener, happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes and Nicol.
Thank you, Convener. I hate to be in a pedantic mood this morning, but however, the key word, the key word there in number 2 is significant objections. Now, I in common, I suspect, with all the members are more than content with this report, and certainly not going to get an argument from me on it. But however, I suspect some people will. I mean, it's a bit up and down. Some things are paying less. Some are paying substantially more. And I would be quite surprised if there weren't objections to it from the house builders. So, if as I say, I hate to be pedantic, but what's the difference between 3 or 4 house builders saying this is outrageous and it will deter house building in this area? Is that a significant objection, or is it does not become significant until there's a real hoo-ha? I mean, it's just to tie down the what's the significant, because I think on balance I'm not strong enough to push it to the vote, but I think it might be better just to say that whatever the objections, if there are objections, they come back, because.
Okay, Mrs. Guys, what do you want to say?
I think my thinking here was if we got responses back that were merely, that could be addressed, it was maybe some semantics or some rewording that didn't change the sense of it, rather than bring it back to members for something very minor, I wouldn't bother with that. But I think if we got objections that set off the nature that you described, this is outrageous and it will affect viability and we don't agree with your methodology or something, that would definitely come back to the members. So it's really relatively minor. But I just mention as well that I obviously remiss me not to thank Alistair for the contribution to this, but also Richard Teague, who I think is also here, was responsible for the other half of the equation going into this, so both of them were constrained.
Just associate myself with Bruno's remarks about those 2 fine officers.
Okay.
Can I add my own to Richard's as well? So apologies to Richard for getting from the initial congratulations, but the course education would have a significant input.
Richard would provide all the figures, the forward plan, etc., which I'm sure helps to create the picture. This is us moving to a one council approach as well, where we have greater collaboration across the council area. Okay, with that clarification, are we happy to accept the recommendations of the report? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. I don't think Rona's getting away just yet either. We move on to item 8, the revised.
Thank you, Convener. The Core Paths Plan is a consequence of changes to the law generated by the Land Reform Scotland Act in 2003, which introduced what was known at that time as the right to roam. Following on that legislation, we formalised the network of paths that we already had in our area, and we significantly grew those, and we are required as a consequence of the legislation to create the paths plan, as I mentioned, but also we're required to revise it from time to time to make sure that it's up to date. Our plan was adopted in 2010, and so that's been a wee while since then, and we obviously need to look at it again. The network, as we say in the report, has grown very significantly in that time, and I would particularly want to draw members' attention to paragraph 3.4 of the report, which notes that between 2014 and 2018 over £6 million was secured for investment in our paths network. I think that's a fantastic achievement, and I'm joined by one of my other great colleagues today, Angus Duncan, who obviously was instrumental in securing a great deal of that money. Don't ask him how he does it. So as you can see from that investment, there are a number of new routes that require to be incorporated. For designation to be included in the plan as a core path, there are a set of criteria that have been developed by the Falkirk Area Access Forum, and the appendix to the report includes the members of that forum, and these are described in paragraph 4.1 of the report. These are the ones that have been used from the beginning of the process, and you can see this stood the test of time. As a consequence of application of these criteria, there's 128 potential new core paths which have met the relevant threshold and are proposed to be included, and 10 which should be deleted or realigned. And that, the consequence of that is over 84 kilometres of additional routes within the network. The consultation, again, this is a document that requires to go out for consultation. It's a 12-week consultation, and the table for approval is shown at paragraph 6.4. This anticipates no inquiry required, but obviously there is provision for a public inquiry in the event that there is an objection which causes that, which triggers that event. We are given that these paths obviously cross over land that doesn't belong to the council, we can quite often have issues with the landowners, although Gus and his colleagues work very hard with the landowners to make sure that this is all done by agreement. So the plan is for is for approval today. Subsequently there will be consultation, and so the recommendation that paragraph 2 is to approve the document, and again to delegate authority to me if there are no responses come back, but to receive a further draft report if there is anything of significance comes back. And again I would offer the same clarification in relation to what would be considered to be significant. It would be an objection, would qualify an objection. It would only be if there were slight modifications to the plan, that I wouldn't bring it back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs Geisling. Our core paths plans extending and is it contributing significantly to the environment and the health and wellbeing programme and meeting a number of corporate objectives in that. So I'm pleased to see that things are moving forward. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Convener. I think Rona's pretty much covered everything as she does, so it's hard to write anything down and prepare for just speaking after her usually. But yeah, I'd like to thank in particular Angus Duncan and congratulate him and his small team and equally small budget, I believe, on not only upkeeping our core path network but increasing this. And I was pleasantly surprised to be reading the table 1, an increase in maintained path network, core path network, an increase of 186 km of total path network. It's quite incredible. And as Rona mentioned, the level of investment, the £6 million external investment is to be applauded from us all. I welcome, as we do, to the consultation commencing next month and see what comes back from that. It should be interesting. And obviously I'm happy to move the recommendations in what is a good news report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Convener. I know it's the Oscars season, but I would also like to congratulate Gus Duncan on the work that he does, and his small team, and his mum and dad, and everybody else that's contributed to becoming the fine officer that he is today. So that's quite genuine, although I joked there, but it is genuine. He is a great officer. In regard to some of the footpaths in my area, I'm going to make a slight criticism now, but some of the colours are a bit hard to tell, at least for me. But could we perhaps, at a later date, obviously, perhaps get a more specific breakdown of the new paths being put in well, certainly my area, and what the works will entail? Footpaths are great things, and I always welcome them. Sometimes they've got unintended consequences. Sometimes you get people objecting to them, and indeed, very sadly, there's a footpath in my ward that had to be closed because of the antisocial people that came with it. So, could I perhaps get a specific breakdown to the new works that will be carried out in my ward, or perhaps if maybe I'll just meet Angus and go over it. Probably that would be the easiest.
I think that it would
be the easiest thing.
Be helpful if all local members were able to have
I think so.
details of I think that would be really helpful ward by ward. But do you want to come forward and say anything?
Because we all welcome these proposals until somebody phones you and says, do you know that this is coming within 3 feet of my house, and I'm not happy. And
in the past, we've certainly given updates through a report up on the funding that's come in with the paths that are doing, but with that we could attach a plan showing exact locations and specifications and that type of thing.
Tie it down a bit so there's no nasty surprises for members. That would be good. Thank you.
Helpful. Okay, thank you. Robert?
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to say that the Core Path Network is another initiative that was developed by Labour over the years, and I'm glad that the current administration is developing this as well. There's been a lot of time and effort and investment being put into these core paths, which is to be welcomed. And I'd just like to ask, who are the community reps on the access groups, and do they change dependent on the location of the paths? You know, as you move out, the different community groups get involved.
There are communities who represent wider user groups within the area, so but within the community councils at the moment there's 2 representatives, but there's an opportunity to change the representatives from them within the Access Forum as it's felt appropriate within the Access Forum. But generally the members who are on the Access Forum have a remit for the whole Falkirk Council area and often beyond the Falkirk Council area as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just a 19-1 convener. Could I just give a gentle reminder to Robert that when he talks about the previous Labour administration, if it was something good that came out of it, could I remind him that it was a joint administration? If it's something bad, then it's nothing to do with me.
Well,
or John.
I was going to comment that you know, we were all members of the, you know, the previous council as well, and that I don't remember there being great opposition to this. So I think that there's a collective responsibility we could be taking in taking this forward. That I don't think that any one person or any one party can claim the credit for all of those things going forward. Councillor Alexander?
Yeah, it was the Romans that gave us pass, and we've been responsible for maintaining them ever since.
Okay, on that, are we happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you. Okay, we're moving on to item tax incremental finance initiative. Can I just... Oh, yes, sorry, Malcolm, yes, indeed. Yes, we'll come and get you. Promise, I promise. Can I just remind members there is some confidential paper within this. If anybody wishes to ask questions on that particular paper, if they could indicate beforehand, as we would need to move into private session. And during the discussion or debate, if you could avoid referring to that particular item. Otherwise, again, we will need to go into private session. Just to be mindful of that. It's a bit unusual that we have this as part of a public paper, but we have to do that for commercial sensitivity. Okay, Mrs. Geisler.
Thank you, Convener. This is obviously my day for being able to bring along with me my very good colleagues, and this report's no exception because Paul James with me for this one. This report relates to the TIF project, which members will be familiar with in terms of our ability to invest in infrastructure to facilitate commercial development in our area. The report today relates to the outcome of the marketing exercise that we undertook in respect of the Falkirk Gateway site. So the project was marketed by the Council's agents, and there were 9 developers who confirmed an interest. 3 were shortlisted to bid and 2 bids were received. These bids were from Finchley Estates, Hargreaves Limited Partnership and Henry Boots Developments Limited. The bids were, both organisations submitted a main bid and a variant scheme, and there's a summary table at paragraph 4.3 that describes the features of both of them. All 4 of the proposals were assessed by an assessment panel involving officers from the Council together with external advisors, GBA. The recommendation is to go with a Finchley Hargreaves partnership, and that's the issue before members today. Once the preferred developer is appointed, the next set of the next set of the process will be to develop heads of terms with the preferred developer, which will have the commercial terms included in it, and some of these are suggested in the confidential item that the conveners referred to. That also has information in relation to the assessment criteria and the scoring in relation to each of the bids that we received. Following today's decision, there will be a formal notification made to the developer, and the work on developing heads of terms can begin. You'll note that in all 4 of the proposals that were presented, there is a significant amount of new retail floor space that's been included, and this was not unexpected. We will have to ensure, however, that these proposals do not have an unacceptably adverse impact on the town centre, and therefore, on the basis that there would have been a requirement for a regional impact assessment to be submitted as part of any planning application in any event, we're suggesting that that exercise is undertaken jointly between the council and the preferred developer at this point. The implications are contained in paragraph 6, Convener. As you can see, the receipt from this disposal will form a contribution to the councillors, to the council's capital programme, and there's a risk matrix as part of the project as well. As I say, the recommendations contained in paragraph 2 are to appoint Finch Estates Hargreaves as a preferred developer in relation to this site, and to authorise the progression of the negotiations and heads of terms, and then report back to members in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Geiser. Councillor Alexander?
Yes, Convener, this is a good news report. The Gateway is an important development in the future of Falkirk District, in particular to Falkirk Town Centre. I was looking back at the previous proposals for the Gateway, and we can see just how significant the changes have been in relation to the general impact of the 2008 crash of the banks. This, I think, begins to address the deficiencies that were created by the collapse of the banks in the 2008 crisis. It does show that the market is beginning to improve. It does show that there is a desire amongst developers to get involved in Falkirk again, and that's to be very much welcomed. The issue of, I'll come back to the issue of retail shortly, because I think that obviously there may be questions round about that particular aspect of the report. But in conjunction with the other aspects that I think that are crucial in determining this report and determining the future of the Gateway, and also its linkage to Falkirk Town Centre regeneration, and that is a crucial element. Because of that, I wish to raise a slight amendment, in fact an addendum, to the recommendations that are on item 2 or paragraph 2, to include a final addendum that agrees to ring fence any developer's profit from the Gateway site to the Town Centre regeneration programme. I think that's crucial in terms of setting the relationship between the Town Centre and the Gateway. It also begins to fill in the blanks that exist, and we accept have existed to the funding of the regeneration programme. It begins to move monies into that particular field and create that sense of momentum for the regeneration that I think we're all looking for. So with that, I'm glad to move the recommendations contained in paragraph 2 with that other addendum that Giant wants to. Normally I would get copies of this made, but it's one-liner. But save paper.
Perhaps I could maybe just clarify a couple of things with you, Councillor Alexander. The retail impact assessment, or maybe Mrs Geisler would be better to, would that include Grangemouth Town Centre, considering the proximity?
Yes.
And just to make sure that...
I was coming back to the retail element of it. There's always been a retail element within the proposals for the Gateway. The previous programme was slightly more restricted in terms of the outcomes. We hope that what we'll see is coming forward is out-of-town retail, something like garden centres, something akin to the garden centres, DIY stores, etc. That's the retail that has been targeted largely. There's also another change in terms of the proposals, and that's for housing as part of the development plan. And of course, where you have houses, you have to have facilities. And there's a small facility being provided to feed the housing element of the development plan itself. So again, we see the connection between these proposals that are before us today and the proposals that are contained within LDB2 and the gateway itself. So with that, Convener, the formally move the recommendations with the addendum, and they're happy to take any questions. I appreciate that this is a very important programme, very important paper today, and one which will, I hope, take a significant step towards the employment benefits that the Gateway can bring to Falkirk District.
Okay, thank you. Nigel?
Thank you, Convener. Just looking at the variance given the Fintry is the preferred bidder at this stage, that am I right in saying that it's only the variant option that it includes any residential area? So number one it doesn't fit with the criteria that it's going to have with the residential. What I can't quite get my head round is how, by even if one accepts the variant option, that introducing two large retail units, I don't see how that is going to benefit the town centre regeneration plan. I don't quite see how any of this sits with the aspirations of the council to regenerate the town centre. I think perhaps, I know that the Gateway project was conceived probably about 10 years ago. I think it's got to be accepted that much has changed for the worse in town centre over that time. But we're still going down the same kind of, or seem to be going down the same sort of route in terms of developing this area. Any comments on that?
And Mrs. Geisler, do you want to?
Yes, I think that that's really is the importance of the retail impact assessment work that will be undertaken. There are a couple of factors. There are retail units, certainly, which we anticipate in here, that wouldn't be suitable for the town centre if they are very large units in the type of product that they're selling. You also have to have regard to the nature of town centres these days, and the fact that the whole retail offering within town centres is changing. So I think one of the things that the impact assessment will look at is, are these retail units suitable for the town centre or not? And the other thing is, even if they were suitable for the town centre, are these operators that would go to the town centre? There's an emerging trend at the moment for particular operators to say, if we can't be in a location like this, well, we're not coming to your area at all. And I think that's some of the, in terms of the economic activity that these businesses bring, the employment, etc. I think that's an important thing for us to think about. The key element here to address your issues and to allay concerns will be the retail impact assessment, because that will look at whether or not there will be any impacts both in Falkirk and Graveswood Town Centre. The report makes reference to the areas town centres, and indeed how, if there is going to be an impact, how that impact might be mitigated. And that would be something that would be part of the planning application, and it will be presented as part of the planning application when it comes forward in any event.
Just another question. I'm just wondering if I've heard of Henry Boot, but the Fintry Estates is not one that I'm aware of. Have you got any background on that particular? Are they the lead part, or are the Hargreaves part the lead part?
It's a joint venture. The Fintry part of it's Fintry Estates Limited. They were established in 2015, but the principals in that company have been involved in commercial property activities for some years. The Hargreaves Services part of the partnership, their background was in mining, as I understand it. They have a significant market capital, but they have been both involved in commercial types of activities in the past, and they have been assessed as part of the assessment process as being a sound partner for us.
I'm just a wee bit concerned about the other half of it in that you say 2015. In fact, they were dormant, I think, until in 2016 and only presented accounts, the first set of accounts for 2017. And they are really quite a small private limited company with a couple of shareholders and not a terribly large capital and asset base at the moment.
But that comes from the other hard news. They have been assessed as part of the process. Obviously, the covenant has been assessed as part of the assessment process as being signed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be before the members today.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Garner.
I'm just coming in to second the recommendations and reserve the right of me to come back in at a later stage.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr Moody just to give a wee bit of comment with regard to the addendum, and it may be more prudent to use the same form of language as we did for the Fair Falkirk and the additional funding, and referring it to the budget as part of that process. Colin, do you want to?
Exactly that point, Convener. It was just to say, consistent with the decision the Executive's already taken with item 5, I think in this case, if it's a decision that would be impacting on the annual setting of the capital budget, it would be better to do that in the form of a recommendation to Council to avoid effectively stepping into Council's shoes for that. I'm not satisfied that this committee is empowered to take that decision.
Sorry, can I just ask to hear it again what the actual addendum was? I know that you said it was to do with transfers of section 75.
It was capital receipts.
Capital receipts, right.
Yeah, any capital receipts. The Gateway site would be ring-fenced for town centre regenerations.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the advice of the legal officer. We certainly, when we drafted the addendum, we believed it was in line with what had been discussed, but happy to accept the advice.
Okay, any further questions?
So that's been withdrawn and it's coming to full council?
No, it will go as part of the recommendations from this paper. That would then go to full council for.
It's exactly the same as was done with the poverty strategy. So this committee is recommending to council as part of the budget process that in that case the £40,000 went into the budget. In this case, it's recommending that any capital receipt from this proposal is ring-fenced for the town centre regeneration programme. But it will ultimately be a decision to be taken at the council budget meeting that ring fencing takes place.
Okay, on that, are we content to approve the report? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm just getting Councillor Nicholl back.
We need to.
Item is item 10, the capital programme update, and Mr Snail's going to speak to the report.
Thank you, Convener. This is the final projection report on capital for the 18-19 financial year. There will be an outturn brought before you in the summer. Focusing first on the general fund capital programme section 4.1, at the bottom of the first page in para 4.1.1, you can see the table that summarises the position, showing both variance from the budget and variance from the position last reported in November. This is picked up later in the report. The paragraphs 4.1.3 through to 4.1.3.9 take each service area and give you an update on the position of the main projects in those service areas. The content will be very similar to what you would have seen in previous reports. Picking up on the variance aspect of it, this is addressed in section 4.2 of the paper, and the little table at the top of that section summarises the position for the variance since the November report. And for each of the lines there, the subsequent paragraphs give the explanation. So in 422, you get the explanation for the external sources. 423 explains the position with the early years slippage in children's services. And then the table in 424 gives you a breakdown of the various projects contributing to the movement in slippage since we last reported. In terms of resources, I suppose, and that's set out in 4.3, section 4.3, I think the main thing to note there is that inevitably, given the reduced size of the programme attributable to slippage, the need for borrowing reduces. Turning to the HRA, the Housing Capital Programme, in section 4.5, given the scale of the programme, that's only marginally less than was reported to the November Executive. Again, at the front end of the section, at 4.5.1, you can see a table that summarises the position, and the subsequent paragraphs 4.5.3 through to 8 outline the main areas of investment and their status. Section 4.6 then deals with the various components of resources. That essentially is a relatively small movement in capital finance from current revenue and the various strands of government grant, some general and some specific. Section 4.8 just picks up on the strong linkage between the capital programme and Treasury management, namely the borrowing to fund the programme. And just picking up in the comment I made a minute ago, the Treasury side is clearly impacted by the reduction in the spend, consequently reduced borrowing. The tail end of the report mops up the two capital reserves, one for capital receipts and the other for capital grants, and you can see the split between the general fund and the HRA in the two tables there, and the consequent balances at this point in time. And finally, 410, section 410, picks up on the closer to home strategy in children's services, which I think members will recall is a major initiative sitting under the Council of the Future, a transformation agenda to deal with the current overspend on the revenue side. And this particular aspect of that broader initiative looks to transfer a couple of properties to enable young people who have been in care to provide them with locally based housing and support, and to help their transition thereafter into mainstream housing. So just turning back to the recommendations at the front of the report, the first three elements there are just advising you to note the report, and the last one deals with the matter I've just raised in terms of the Closer to Home initiative. I'm happy to pick up any questions that members have, and directors, I'm sure, will be able to address questions on their own projects.
Thank you, Brian, for that. As you say, this is the final quarter, and I think obviously that there's still concerns around the slippage in relation to the programmes, and it was good to have the detail, and some of it is around the early years expansion, which is very understandable in trying to manage those projects. And I know the department are trying very hard to find ways of doing things in year, as opposed to having to do it during the closed period when the schools aren't actually in or on holiday. But it'll take a bit of time for the new regime of the monitoring to bed in, but we hope to see that that's starting to be more robustly managed as we move forward. The Closer to Home project is one, as you said, there's CREAC transformation programmes, and this has been this particular initiative has been very much led by the young people themselves, and designing what they see as the best form of home or aftercare or through care, whatever way you would wish to put that, for themselves, and the repurposing of the property, it makes sense to transfer it into the HRA, and that will then be able to be managed as part of the bigger changes within housing as we go forward, particularly the rapid rehousing and housing first. So we are where we are with regard to the capital programme. There's some good detail on why things aren't moving as quickly as they should be, or quickly as anticipated moving, and it will be there for members to scrutinise if they so wish. But other than that, I'm happy to move the recommendations as in section 2. Councillor Bowes?
There's been an amount of thanking of people today now that Development Services Department have all gone back to work. Can I thank Brian for this and many other reports during the year? Yeah, there has been slippage in here. I think one of the important points, the most important points, is the safety checks you've put in place, where there's going to be more scrutiny from in department during the year to try to restrict as much as possible how much slippage actually occurs. I know that's not long in place, so I didn't expect to see that from the last report to this there would be this miracle change, although obviously it can be looked at and sort of compared better on next year's. I think it's a good management thing done there with the teams, and I really do appreciate that. Even in this, you see the slightly better detail in the 4.24 particularly shows that. Yes, there's less borrowing, which obviously means we're not paying for that next year. However, these are programmes that will come ahead, so that may affect us in future budgets rather than particularly next year. So I know that's what you're very conscious of and want to reduce as much as possible. With that, can I just again say thank you, Brian?
Yeah, just say, Convener, and to give credit where credit's due, and thank you for the comments that my colleague Carol McGee has done all the hard work in preparing this. So I'll pass on your thanks to her.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm?
Thank you, Cecil. Could I just make a little plea that I know that's not always going to be possible, but perhaps sometimes it would be helpful if officers were a bit more specific about time frames. So I'm just looking at 423, and it reads, as detailed in paragraph 413, the spend on the expansion of early years projects is expected to be 1.8 million, which is 1.294 million less than the November forecast. Okay. Some projected expenditure had to be placed on hold to allow the service time to consult on and assess the viability and use of other properties. Well, that's fine, and I understand that, but could we just sort of say, and we hope to finalise this within 3 months or whatever, just so that we know it's progressing?
That's a fair point, Malcolm, because it was a consultation around the nurseries, and that's now been carried out, so that we could have actually put in a wee bit more there.
Yeah, just so a bit of comfort, so that we know things aren't just forever going to go down the black hole.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? No? Happy to approve the report? Okay, thank you. To the final item, and that is item 10, the land exchange at Meeks Road, Falkirk and Earls Road in Grangemouth, and it's back to Mrs Geisler.
This is very straightforward a report. I won't take up a lot of your time. In essence, the council owns a site at Greenson Station in Falkirk, which we lease to the rail company, and vice versa, and we lease a site from them at Earls Road Depot in Grangemouth. And we're just suggesting that we formalise these by purchasing our respective interests in the respective sites, and the plans are attached to the report.
Okay, Councillor Alexander.
Pretty straightforward, Convener, so I move to accept the recommendations.
Okay, anyone otherwise minded? Any questions? Happy to agree? Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your attendance this morning.